Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for the Cosmic Weather Report. My name is Téana David, and I'm just thrilled to dive into our program today. As those of you who have already watched all 10 episodes of Changing of the Gods, as you know, the series ended on a cliffhanger with the tailing off of the Uranus-Pluto world transit in early 2021, marked by, of course, the storming of the Capitol in the US. So now it's 2 years later. Uranus and Pluto are in a different configuration, which we're going to hear all about. We'll also learn about other major world transits for the next 10 or so years, and even examine the planetary returns of the US birth chart. Our discussion will last for about 90 minutes, at which time we'll be able to answer some of your questions. And what else to share? I think it's time to introduce our luminaries. We have with us Richard Tarnas, who is a professor of psychology and cultural history at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, where he founded the graduate program in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness. His second book, Cosmos and Psyche, is the basis of the Changing of the Gods docuseries. There's a lot more I could say about Rick, but we'll leave it there for now. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, and looking forward to today.
I'd like now to introduce Luisah Teish. She's a storyteller, a writer, an artist activist, and a spiritual guidance counselor. She's an initiated elder in the Ifa Orisha tradition of the West African diaspora. Much of her work focuses on global food security, water quality and access, reforestation, and ending violence against women and girls. Welcome, Teish.
Alafia, everybody. I'm glad to see we are talking to the world. I got good news for you.
Oh, I'm so glad. We look forward to that. Let's now move to Becca Tarnas, who is a scholar, an archetypal astrologer, and storyteller who teaches at both Pacifica Graduate Institute and the California Institute of Integral Studies, where she also received her doctorate degree. Becca is an editor of Archai, the Journal of Archetypal Cosmology, and author of the book Journey to the Imaginal Realm, A Reader's Guide to J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. Becca, thanks so much for being with us.
It's such a pleasure to be here and an absolute honor to be on this panel.
And now we have Kenny Ausubel, who is the visionary filmmaker behind the Changing of the Gods docuseries. Having written, co-directed, and co-produced it, he definitely qualifies as a veritable triple threat. He's also an award-winning social entrepreneur, author, and journalist. Kenny's the co-founder and CEO of Bioneers, the internationally recognized nonprofit dedicated to incubating and promoting solutions for restoring people and the planet, and one of my favorite conferences each year. Kenny, congratulations again on Changing of the Gods, and it's so nice to have you here with us.
Well, thank you so much, Téana. It's just super. First of all, I am so honored to be with my esteemed colleagues here. And, Cosmos and Psyche, on which the series, which inspired the series, Rick, is just an absolute landmark and a masterpiece. And it brought all of us together in these ways. So thank you so much for that. And I was looking at the chat and seeing people from all over the world. This is amazing, including people in Europe where it's the middle of the night. So that is dedication. So hopefully we'll live up to our promise here tonight.
To get us started, let's look at a clip about world transits from Changing of the Gods, Episode 1.
When we first started doing this research, of course, the very first focus was to look at all the birth charts of the people that I knew in the Esalen community. And then I started studying the transits of people who were very famous, like cultural figures, historical figures, like what did Galileo have when he turned his telescope to the heavens for the first time and saw the Copernican universe open up to him? What did Rosa Parks have as a transit when she decided she wasn't going to get up from the seat in the bus and catalyze the civil rights movement? What did Freud have as a transit when, as he put it later, the secret of dreams was revealed to him and he got the insight of how the unconscious was speaking symbolically through the dream? And then I started seeing the patterns of what we call world transits. These coincide with entire cultural epochs, sustained historical periods that have a quality, a zeitgeist, that perfectly reflects the archetypal quality that astrologers have concluded are connected to those particular planets. Tracing back in history, the many times that Uranus and Pluto came into either conjunction or opposition or the square in between, it would coincide with a sustained period of about 12 years. These were the major periods of social and political rebellion, revolutions, widespread protests, whether it's by workers or for civil rights movements, for women's rights, for gay rights. Everybody who lived through the 60s has a sense that something pretty remarkable was happening there. It was like something was in the air.
But the question is, why in the 60s, Eric?
There are periods in history, so far as I can see it, when human energies, both constructive and destructive, just seem to come to a boil.
There is in the land a certain restlessness.
2011 may be most remembered as a year of global protests and uprisings.
You want me to go somewhere and fight, but you won't even stand up for me here at home.
No, this country stands for freedom, liberty, justice for all. And it's not happening for all right now.
Time and again throughout American history, it's a police confrontation, touches off widespread violence.
In the name of all Indians, we reclaim this land for our Indian nation. This land should rightfully be granted to us for as long as the river shall run and the sun shall shine.
This is 2016, and you don't get to treat Indians like you have.
Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump channeling the most infamous things about Richard Nixon.
Breaking story just moments ago, the Supreme Court making same-sex marriage legal in this country across every state in this nation.
Thanks to the spirit of equality in the air, I no longer accept society's judgment that my group is second class.
One of us can be dismissed, two of us can be ignored, but together we are a movement and we are unstoppable.
First massive nationwide protest against the pollution of the environment.
Young folks who marched and mobilized and stood up and sat in, from Seneca Falls to Selma to Stonewall, didn't just do it for themselves, they did it for other people.
Jung called this the kairos moment, the right moment for a changing of the gods, of the fundamental principles and symbols. Clearly, something like that is at work.
Well, excellent. What a clear demonstration of the undeniable expression of world transits and also how history seems to rhyme. Rick and Becca, let's start with you. In terms of world transits, where are we now and where are we headed?
Thank you. One of the things that's crucial about understanding the whole idea of world transits is that they represent these very powerful archetypal waveforms that kind of surge into the collective psyche, into the culture at a given time, and they influence events. Not so much the planets causing things to happen, but they inform the archetypal principles or the gods and goddesses, however we want to conceive or imagine or perceive them. They have their own dynamics that are unfolding through history, and the mystery of the astrological perspective, and it's a kind of gift from the cosmos, I think, is that it allows us to get a glimpse, a handle on like what are the gods up to right now? Like what are the major archetypal forces at play at a given moment? And one of the things that's crucial to understand about this moment is that it is coming right after this tremendous upheaval and surge, this kind of volcanic transformational energy that we went through over the last decade and a half. And then Saturn joined the picture towards the end and really brought things to very kind of a crisis point, a reality principle that kind of really had to be faced. And so we're coming right in the wake of that. And I thought it would be helpful to show a little diagram of, if you think of these waveforms, these archetypal waveforms that are correlated with the movements of particularly the outer planets, the outermost planets that we have the most evidence for and understanding of, particularly the Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and then Saturn and Jupiter play a big role as well. And if we look at what were the three major world transits that basically have been shaping this last period we're in, and that we're right now at a kind of we're moving towards the end of them. And maybe Becca, could you just share your screen for a sec, and we'll look at that.
Here we are.
Thank you. So what you see here is there's a kind of simplified graph that shows over time, moving from 2007 roughly on the left, going all the way up to the mid 2020s on the right. And over that time, that the really big longer transit was that Uranus square Pluto, which is what Changing of the Gods focused on. It occupied like what about 70 pages, early pages of Cosmos and Psyche, tracking out how that particular cycle happened in the 60s, the conjunction or French Revolution, et cetera. And what might we expect going into a period that was coming after Cosmos and Psyche was published, but we knew where the planets would be, and we thought, well, given what we know, typically this is a period of tremendous change and acceleration of history, a great kind of volcanic pressure for changing the past structures and bringing about greater freedom, new like advances on different fronts, et cetera, and political, social, ecological movements of all kinds tended to get catalyzed. And what we also need to understand is that when these planets come into alignment, they represent a kind of mutual activation on both sides. Becca, could we go forward to that one graph, and then we'll go right back? So these are the symbols for the outer planets here. And I just want you to focus on the top line there. That's Uranus on the left, Pluto on the right. And I have bidirectional arrows there to emphasize the fact that they're each influencing each other with their own particular archetypal quality. So Pluto is driving the Uranian Promethean principle of change, revolution, freedom, scientific and technological advance, the unexpected, et cetera. But also the arrow goes in the other direction from Uranus to Pluto. And in that particular vector, the Uranian energy is liberating the Plutonic, which means it awakens it into sudden, unexpected manifestation. And the Plutonic, it has this volcanic energy, but it relates to like the deep instincts, the underworld of the psyche, profound evolutionary transformation, but driving energy that can get, it's very instinctual, and it can bring about kind of mob energy, for example. So the Uranus square Pluto that was basically going there from 2007 all the way to into 2020, and these are approximate orbs, as we call them, but they over and over again in history we see a kind of consistency with which historical and cultural events match up to these alignments according to these kind of orbs of roughly about 10 degrees, a little bit more for the square, and then for the conjunction or the opposition, more like 15 degrees orb. So I'm wanting to emphasize this first point because we're still in the wake of what happened over the last decade and a half. And these big cyclical transits set in motion energies that are quite they don't just stop like as if you've turned off the light switch. They've activated multiple cultural movements, individual lives. The things have been set in motion, and there's a momentum. And even as the transit moves towards the end, 2019, 2020, and even beyond, we still are feeling the energy, much as was true in the 70s, for example. Even though the transit of the Uranus-Pluto went to 72, 60 to 72 roughly, it's not like feminism or the gay liberation movement or the ecology movement just stopped in 72. No, it's set in motion, and it keeps unfolding. And so also do the more problematic sides of Uranus-Pluto, such as this kind of activation of the primordial id or the will to power in problematic ways, authoritarian, populist, kind of dictatorial leaders and so forth across the world. Okay, so that's still, we're still dealing with the consequences of that period, but also the energies, still there's a momentum there. And then everything, as you can see, converge. All three of these world transits, Saturn conjunct Pluto, very strong encounter with the reality principle and the end of an era typically, and meeting great constraints or critical challenges, etc. And you can just see right at the time of the pandemic coming in, basically all three of these transits were world transits were overlapping, going right into 2021, January 6th, et cetera. So now where we are still now, you are here, maybe Becca, you could point the arrow where we are now in 2023. Yeah. And so we're in the later stages of the Saturn square Uranus energy. Now, Uranus represents that impulse for change, but also, for the new, for the future. It's connected to youth. It's connected to the an orientation that is moving forward in unpredictable, creative, innovative ways that also involve in that basic impulse for change. But Saturn is resistance to change. Saturn wants to hold steady. Saturn, in its positive form, wants to keep valuable structures from being overthrown, and in its problematic side can be just stubbornly, oppressively negating of the impulse for change or for social reform and so forth. And so you can see that Saturn-Uranus energy that we are going through, and we have been for the last roughly 3 years, and we still got a bit more. This, another year of it is still in motion, and there's a quality of this that involves meeting crises, meeting tensions, sometimes tensions between certainly the old and the new, the past and the future. It also can take the form of between generations, the older generation and the younger generation feeling and tensions with each other, and it tends towards a divisiveness, a civil disturbance kind of quality of its own. Like, the only way I can be free is to have a secession, to secede from this relationship or from this government or something like that. So there's a kind of separative, schismatic energy that's involved with it. And also, typically, there's technological challenges. All the way the tech companies have been having to lay off people, and criticisms of the high-tech world, of the social media world, et cetera, and also even with the Uranian connection with aerial objects, for example, and Saturn shooting them down. We've had a lot of that in the last few weeks, plane crashes and things like that, the train accident in derailment in Ohio, very typical for these Saturn-Uranus qualities. And I'll just say one last thing and turn it over to Becca. And that is Saturn-Uranus has this, the ideal integration of these energies, which it's pressing for, is basically like, how can we find ways to make changes that hold on to what is most valuable about the past, or about the current structures, about tradition and so forth. At the same time, make reforms, make changes, structural reforms are really important. Can be infrastructure, technological, so that we don't get electrical power outages, which we're hoping don't happen tonight with our winter storms here in California. But it can take many other forms. So there's always that, always want to hold out that ideal of, even under the hard aspects like the square that we're going through here, that there is this potential to bring together those energies in highly life-enhancing ways. And it's often through a crisis that we are able to see the need for a new horizon to open up, or even that opens up that horizon, that breakdown of a previous structure opens up the new horizon that turns out to be much more life-enhancing. So those are some of the many headlines that I could bring up, but I'll rely on Becca bringing up some more, and maybe you can come back to your image and stop sharing the screen so we can see you.
Well, that was so wonderful. And I just wanted to say too, well, we have this image here, how you can see the long arc of the Uranus-Pluto square, and then these two shorter transits that involve Saturn, they're activating each of the two planets that are part of the Uranus-Pluto square in sequence. So Saturn first aligns with Pluto, and the major correlation there, of course, is the COVID-19 pandemic, but so many other things during that period that lasted from 2018 to 2021, a very kind of deep, dire consequences. And that's a Saturnian word, consequences. We see the effect of, in a lasting way, in a very real and serious way, when Saturn is involved. And so Saturn first aligning with Pluto, which will bring up a lot around survival, the struggle for survival, and then followed immediately by Saturn highlighting Uranus, the other planet in the Uranus-Pluto square that we've been through in the last decade and a half. And so it's almost like these few years following 2020 have shown us the consequences in both negative and positive forms of the Uranus-Pluto, what the lasting effect is. And again, that's a Saturnian idea, the endurance, the lasting quality. So I just wanted to bring that in, and how they all relate to each other. I wanted to speak a little bit to how we can personally participate in the world transits, because when we look at the transits, it can sometimes feel like, well, we're just kind of at the whim of these larger cosmic forces. But really, by knowing what transits are unfolding, we actually have the opportunity to more consciously engage, to more consciously participate. And so, for example, with this Saturn-Uranus square, how the world transits unfold for you personally, that'll depend, for example, on how the world transits are in relationship to your own chart, what are called personal transits. But nonetheless, even with that more specific viewpoint, we're all participating in the collective zeitgeist, even if it's just simply being aware of the larger dynamics that are unfolding. And so Rick spoke about how Saturn-Uranus relates so much to crisis, which we've been seeing unfolding around us to such a high degree. And so what we can do in response is prepare for crisis and deal with crises when they come up. And, let's say, like we all are experiencing across the United States, for example, this major winter storm coming in, and as you see these potential crises unfolding, looking at, well, what can I do to prepare, even at that simplest level of, making sure you have all your basic needs met and so on. And another thing to think about with Saturn-Uranus is that Uranus relates to change, and Saturn relates to structure, to the kind of the structures of our lives, for example. So being able to make those structural changes, the hard changes in your life as well, that shift you need to make, but it feels like it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to be a burden to take on. Again, those are Saturnian themes of work, the burden, carrying the weight. But when we commit ourselves to making those hard changes, they can often have very enduring, very long-lasting effects, again, which is a quality of Saturn. And so to think about it this way, the changes you make now are going to have long-term consequences far beyond this particular world transit. They'll set things in motion in your own life that will have enduring effects. A few other things at that personal level, one can cultivate a kind of a dynamic balance between discipline, which is Saturnian on the one hand, and creative freedom on the other. We can get a lot done from that place where we hold that balance. And furthermore, how we can look to the wisdom of the past, which is again related to Saturn. Saturn has to do with the past, with tradition, like the weight of history, looking to that wisdom of the past in order to envision a new future, which is related to Uranus, the archetype of Uranus. And so one area where we can do that is make structural reform within our institutions. The Uranus-Pluto dynamic is more instinctual and arising from the depths, and so there can be a desire to be more destructive in getting those changes across. And the impulse more with Saturn-Uranus is, how do we reform from the inside? How do we create structural changes within the institutions that exist? And usually it's through the crises and seeing the cracks in the foundations that we recognize it's time to make those changes. Or, sometimes you do have to dismantle the building. And I think for those of you who think along these lines, a great image to hold in mind with Saturn-Uranus is the Tower card from the Tarot, which often is used to symbolize crisis. And so Saturn is like the long endurance of the tower, this old structure built with stone that is suddenly and unexpectedly struck by lightning, which is a very Uranian image. Uranus is lightning quick, it's sudden, it's unexpected, out of the blue, that brings that tall structure crashing down. So Saturn is the tower, Uranus is the lightning. And so we can see that unfold in many different ways, both symbolically and literally. And I just, one world transit I wanted, or one collective correlation I wanted to mention here that hadn't come up yet is the huge devastating earthquake that just happened in Turkey and Syria, where so many lives were lost largely because of infrastructure collapse. And that happened to take place right as the full moon was aligning with the Saturn Uranus square in the sky. So this really kind of major devastating expression of the Saturn-Uranus, and seeing how how we build our structures, quite literally, but also more metaphorically, more symbolically, will show what can endure through time. And again, this emphasis on making those changes now in this time that we want to see endure, and then likewise looking at what needs to be released, what needs to be let go in those changes and in those transformations. So yeah, I think that about covers what I wanted to say in relation to the Saturn-Uranus square at this point.
That's wonderful, Becca. Thank you so much for bringing in those crucial points. And because we're kind of laying the groundwork for what we're going to be doing for the rest of our time here in terms of looking at what's coming and the transits, world transits for the rest of this decade. And Becca brought up an important point about how it's just knowing what one's transits are is very, we tend to act them out anyway, but if you have some idea of what's happening when, and this is that kind of gift that I feel that the cosmos has given us through the astrological correlations between planets and their movements and the archetypal energies that we recognize in our human life. What always we need to keep in mind that if they're open to multiple enactment, and it's up to us, our level of consciousness, as to how we manifest these, how we express these energies, and knowing what transits are happening when can help us make these kinds of use the energies that are at work, but bring out their most noble potential, their most life-enhancing potential, and not be as susceptible to the shadow potentials that are always there as well. So human consciousness and our own agency is so important for how these come through. It's not like all fatalistic or anything like that, even though they're quite powerful and transpersonal, trans-individual. So let's turn it back to Téana, and we'll go from there.
Great. Yes, thank you so much, Rick and Becca. Wow, that's already so much information. Gosh, you spoke about lasting transformation, Becca, and that makes me think about Oshun. And so I wonder, Teish, if you might be able to tell us now about this powerful goddess in your tradition and what she might be whispering to us in the coming months and years.
Ashe. I need to give the background for people who may not be familiar, but in the traditions of the African diaspora, the priests get together and perform divination to ask the ancestors, the orishas, all of the spiritual energies, what is coming and how we should conduct ourselves in the light of what is coming. Now, in the film, I explained, and I guess we'll take another look at that. I explained Uranus and Pluto in terms of Ogun, the wild man in the woods, right? And Oya, the goddess of unconditional change, the mother of transformation. And as we perform the divinations year after year after year, they show themselves to be true. For example, we've been being told that we need to placate the water spirits, and we've seen tsunami and flood and so on. And this year, for this first 6 months especially, the messages that have been coming through pretty much are telling us to check our behavior. Okay, we are told to sit in meditation and receive energy and information before you jump up and take action. Okay, because there's an impulsiveness here that can really, really get you confused and throw you off guard. Of course, the Earth through Oya has been saying no more extractions, no more destroying the planet, because that's destroying ourselves. And we can see the problem, from my point of view, of egotism that results in war. That results in war. So a lot of people are caught in a quandary because the pandemic, right, and the period of time that they were in quarantine caused them to, quote unquote, lose certain things. I lost my relationship, I lost my business, I lost my independence, I lost, and there's this long list of what they no longer have. Here's the late breaking news, people. Some people are saying, can I want to go back to? No. We cannot just return to where we were when the pandemic hit, right? And the problem is that we tend to go to that which is familiar, the default setting, even if it was dysfunctional. The other problem is that people have a great difficulty with embracing mystery. I don't know what's going to happen next, so I'm going to do what I did before, even though it got me in trouble. Okay, this is the quandary that people are in, and we need to know that the light in our own eyes is the light that will open the path in front of us. In order to do that, you have to have enough humility to receive information and to follow what we call the open road. Now, I know everything that's been said sounds like, oh my God, another dozen years of burden and worry and so on. But the good news is that Oshun, the goddess of love, art, sensuality, okay, it's said of Oshun that when the doctor fails, she cures everything with clear water. When depression starts to fall down upon you, she appears and lifts you up, you know. So what we need to do with all the planetary movements that's going on, we need to ask creativity to be with us. We need to do we need to do creative expression, right? We need to improve our personal relationships with each other. We need to see the beauty in nature, and that will lift us up out of any depression, any confusion that we are having. I am happy to say that she has said to me that she's willing to grant favor to those who are smart enough to ask her humbly. So I'm asking you, audience, to think about what it is that you need to make it through all the changes that are coming, right? What is it that you would ask this goddess to bless you with? And when you get a chance, put it in the chat and we'll talk to her about it.
I'm so glad that there is hope on the horizon. Recognize the beauty of nature and allow that to lift you up.
Absolutely. That's the medicine, you see. It really isn't as complex as we sometimes think. Like they said, when the doctor fails, she heals with cool water, okay? The simplicity, beauty, right? And the willingness to be innocent enough to let your creativity come through. This is what will save us, because it is by being that open to her love and her inspiration that we will be able to see what we can do to create a better world, dealing with all these forces, all these forces. In the mythology, when Ogun, when Mr. Pluto is cutting up, tearing everything up, waging war all the time, the one who tames him is Oshun by smearing honey on his lips.
Well, that's good medicine.
You see, you need humor, you need beauty,
Mm-hmm.
you need release, you need to be able to create. The ability to create is our greatest power.
I'm also hearing getting back to basics.
Yes.
Like, how about sunshine medicine?
Yes.
How about river medicine?
That's right. Especially river medicine. In fact, we have been told to get some wildflower honey, your local wildflower honey, and go to the river and speak to her, saying, "Sweet mama, mama, this is what I need." Stick your finger in the honey, taste it to be sure it's not poison, and drip honey into the river. Now, it has to be followed by some action that is apropos of her. So if you're at the river and there's trash, pick up the trash, because that ain't beautiful, right? If you're on your way home and you see somebody who's hungry, feed that person, because that ain't beautiful. If you get home and feel like you want to pick up a pen and start drawing, you ain't got to go to art school. Pick up the pen and start drawing.
Yes.
Right. Find out what she's trying to tell you.
Oh, that is such practical wisdom. Yay, Teish. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Breathing it in.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'd love to turn it back to Rick and Becca to take us into the Uranus-Pluto Trine that we're currently inside of. I'm curious, what are some events that happened the last time these planets were aligned in this way, and what might we expect this time around?
Well, I'll start off and then bring it over to Becca. Becca, do you want to just show that Uranus-Pluto Trine diagram for just to show that where the trine is coming into range? And so here you see, instead of the simple single curve, which is how I had drawn those other ones, this is showing the continual crests and troughs of the because Uranus and Pluto move at different paces, and they go retrograde and direct, etc., closer to exact and then further away from exact. But overall, you can see the range of years that we're talking about. We're in a very significant world transit that involves a harmonious relationship. The trine, it's 120 degrees. It's like if you were to have a grand trine, you would see a perfect equilateral triangle in the sky. So this is like two of the planets are in that perfect triangle, and they form what's called a trine, which is a harmonious confluent integration of the energies that were in square all during the 2010s, and so that was the major focus of changing of the gods. That suggests that the kinds of energies that were activated there, which are still in the air, and the same planets are still moving into relationship with each other, interacting dynamically, archetypally, but there's just this greater potential for a harmonious, confluent expression. For example, a deep striving for change, for reform. There's still that powerful impulse to bring forth the new, but especially I think as we move out of that Saturn square Uranus, there's this potential for a less stressed, a less fraught expression of the same energies. So there's more a sense of wanting to participate in evolutionary change, both in one's own life, but in the life of the community, of the collective, of Gaia. it also can spur artistic and scientific creativity and inventiveness. Technological experiment and innovation will still be quite on the menu. But that, like the drive for social justice reform, for equality, freedom, ecological awareness, those are very much with us, but again, less fraught forms. And in a sense, some of the themes that Teish brought up, Teish has this beautiful divinatory capacity to, kind of be in a form of dialogue with the great powers, and particularly, from within her tradition, to have these kind of personal dialogue with the god or goddess involved, which is something that was very much part of humanity's capacities over the millennia. And thank God that there, or goddess, thank goddess that there are people who can carry forward those divinatory gifts. And some of the themes that Teish brought up, for example, yes, Pluto has this potential destructive quality, but as Kenny likes to say, what if everything goes right? And with the trine energy from Uranus and Pluto, you have this, you can draw out the more positive potential within Pluto, which among other things is the sensuality that Teish mentioned, and also the deep powers of nature that in some sense we need to reconnect with and be blessed by as we walk through the forest or do a ritual by the river. I think in general also during this we're really looking at the rest of the decade this is a blessing. I mean, it definitely can ease up potentially, some of those stresses and like that Saturn square Uranus is such a tension between conservative and progressive or reactionary right wing extremism versus either progressive or extreme left-wing potentials, and they can really get into a kind of clash that tends to make structures collapse or certainly be in crisis. And with this coming energy that we're already moving into, there's more and more capacity to come into relationship with the natural world, with our own depths, with our sensual energies, with our impulse for transformation, with the impulse for bringing about change and freedom, but to do that in a more confluent way. I think working the importance of working in communities, to work with each other, never trying to do it alone, how important that is. There's also this kind of a continuation of the awakening of youthful energies and countercultural impulses, and feeling in touch with the deeper generational and evolutionary impulses that are shaping the collective psyche. So this is these are really promising. It's a promising situation that I think we can be working with. And for example, the last time that they were in trine was the 1920s, and you think of something like that, the coming of the jazz age, the swing era, but particularly the sense of a kind of liberated youth and of new possibilities that came after World War I and all the mortality and losses that happened, and conflicts. And then there was this period of the trine of Uranus and Pluto that can be quite growth oriented and optimistic. And this will be particularly true as we get into the next transit that we'll talk about, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that's coming soon, later this year, as a matter of fact. But let's keep with the Uranus trine Pluto. And what if everything goes right? Let me pass it over to Becca for her additional comments on this.
All right, I just wanted to share that image again because there was a request for it, just to see when the Uranus trine Pluto came into orb. And you can really see it's the middle and later part of the decade where it's really peaking, that the two planets are in tightest alignment, and then it leaves the orb of influence within 2032. So this is about a decade-long transit. It didn't come, it's already activated. And, I think we're seeing that in some of the new waves of technological innovation. Probably the one that's catching the airwaves the most is around AI, ChatGPT, and all the ways people are looking at how that's going to change, revolutionize so many different areas of life, whether that's education or business, how we think, even how we learn, how we're educated. And so just kind of tracking those continually unfolding changes that are picking up on the themes that were already activated in the Uranus-Pluto square. And one thing that I think is worth mentioning, the last time Uranus and Pluto were in trine, as Rick said, was in the 1920s, like the Roaring Twenties. And then the subsequent alignment was the square of the 1930s, where there's a lot more tension between the two archetypes, Uranus and Pluto, as we see the rise of fascism, for example. And here, this has to do with how planetary cycles work in relationship to each other. On that side of the cycle, it moves from that 120-degree trine into the tighter square. This side of the cycle, we're moving from that square out into the trine. And so it's kind of an inverse in some ways of what happened last time in terms of how the two transits of the same planets relate to each other. And so I think that this is really an opportunity to integrate a lot of what has come up in the Uranus-Pluto square, that so much kind of had the lid ripped off of it during the square. There was so much social upheaval, a larger collective awakening to so many forms of injustice, racial injustice, gender inequality, all of these different things that are documented so beautifully in Changing of the Gods. I think in large part because of social media, because of the technology to record these different incidences, that contributes to this kind of unleashed awareness that then under the trine can be integrated into the culture and seen, well, how can this be more holistically recognized and woven into the fabric of our society? And so there is still that ongoing opportunity to participate in the revolutionary arenas that align with the causes that your heart connects with, whether that's social justice or feminism and gender identity or racial justice or ecological justice. All these areas are, like Rick was saying before, the energy kind of carries over from the square, but having the trine right now gives a deeper archetypal support to weaving that into our society. So those are just a couple points that I would want to bring up there.
I'm really hearing from you, what if things go right? And there certainly is an opportunity, an opening for them to go right. And also how there's an opportunity for us to participate with the cosmos to bring about the change we want to see in the world. Yeah.
I'm just loving hearing all this, and thank you so much. You know, a lot of what we looked at in the film is this kind of, you know, cycles of revolution and counter-revolution. So I think, you know, for me, the Saturn-Uranus, that is also an image of counter-revolution. We've seen this immense backlash of the elites, essentially, or existing structures, the status quo, trying to suppress that change. At the same time, we're trying to, as Rick was saying, trying to change these systems themselves. But, you know, just to name a couple of things that have leapt out at me, in the technological area, obviously everybody's aware of all the layoffs at the tech companies, as well as the cloud they're under for good reason, of the kind of harms that they cause and the purely financial motives that drive almost every decision. And what's been happening, and there was a big article in the New York Times recently about this, a lot of people in the tech world have actually been bailing and moving into the area of clean technology and renewable energy. And I think we're going to see massive innovation. And I know Rick will talk shortly about the Jupiter-Uranus, which also relates to this technologically. But I think, you know, we in the film, we also covered, you know, we covered the rise of renewable energy. And it's clear that during the Uranus-Pluto square, there is really a regime change that has happened. We're not going back to fossil fuels. It's going to be a pitched battle to get past it fast enough. That's more the question. But it is history. We're going to be moving into entirely different technological regimes now. And so I think that's going to be a really interesting area to watch. Also the area of biomimicry, which we talk about in the film, of actually looking to nature, which again is Pluto, the deep nature, evolution itself, nature's solutions. Nature has had 3.8 billion years of R&D. You know, we have a thing or two we can learn from that. And I would encourage people to learn more about Pioneers, which is the group Téana mentioned that my wife, Nina Simons, and I founded, but most of the people that you saw in the film, the interview subjects, are from the Pioneers networks. And it's a treasure trove of kind of the cutting edge models and approaches to the kinds of things that we're talking about. I think also, you know, I am continually sort of shocked and amazed that things that have not been on the table for discussion are suddenly up. You know, people are looking at democracy, for example, the Electoral College, which, you know, talking about an archaic structure that was designed as an anti-democratic structure, that's actually on the table. It's got to go. You know, why would you ever, you know, have something like that in place as opposed to a popular vote? Look at the Supreme Court. It's due for a major shakeup. I think people have had it with, you know, these kinds of clearly anti-democratic institutions. So if we're moving into the trine and there's going to be some flow, all these things that have been clashing are going to, you know, start. This is the opportunity. If we use our agency, obviously it's not going to happen by itself, but the conditions are ripe for those kinds of changes, I think. Additionally, just a couple of things I would mention is, you know, there's, you know, a lot of this stuff isn't really reported sufficiently or accurately in the corporate media for the most part, but there's very powerful movements, including in Europe now, to deconstruct monopolies, for antitrust legislation. You know, you don't have to look far to see how negative and destructive these monopolies are, and absolutely inefficient, ineffectual. You know, they actually stifle innovation. So I think we're going to see big shakeups in those kinds of areas. And one last thing I want to mention now, but the rights of nature movement, which is also in the film, we document that, is now the fastest growing environmental movement in history. Nothing like this has been seen before. In this country and around the world, it's also indigenous peoples that are now often at the forefront of leadership of that movement. That has been their paradigm for, you know, centuries and millennia, with qualifications. There's complexity there. However, you know, we need to be in a partnership with nature, and we are the junior partner. You know, a Navajo friend of ours made a beautiful statement when he was kind of riffing off the idea of rights of nature. He said it very simply. He said, nature has its ways and nature will have its way. And I think that about sums it up. We can regulate whatever we want, but we're not going to regulate nature. She's going to do what she wants to do here. And if we learn to play by nature's operating instructions, then we've got a good shot at things working. If we don't, we're already seeing the kinds of consequences of that. And Teish, I'm kind of curious from your point of view also, you know, in relation to, I mean, we're seeing so much othering now, and, you know, racial justice issues. The backlash to Obama, to Black Lives Matter has been huge, but those movements are not going away. I mean, I think we're about to see, you know, we're being pushed. we have to really stand up for what we believe in and act. By 2020, Black Lives Matter was the biggest movement in American history. I mean, so that is not gone.
No.
I'm curious if you have perspectives on the social justice.
I think the thing that people have to realize and accept is we are in a state now where we are going to decolonize our minds. We must decolonize our minds. And I want to say that colonialism has hurt everybody. Everybody was wounded by that period of what I call historical adolescence, you know, where people thought, well, if I have the biggest toy, if I have the biggest gun, I'm the baddest mother on the block and I can go steal from other people. The earth herself will not allow that anymore. We cannot do that anymore and survive as a species on this planet, okay? So decolonization, letting go of the way of greed and domination is required for our own salvation. I need everybody to get that. The second part of that is reconnecting us to our indigenous spirituality. Everybody in the beginning of human history had a spirituality that recognized Mother Nature and revered her, okay? So we have a thing called Sankofa, which is an image of a bird. It has an egg in its mouth. It's looking back, but it's flying forward, okay? We need to take a look at what were the beliefs and practices when we had a better relationship to the earth, right? And begin to reclaim, this is biomimicry, yeah? Begin to reclaim our relationship to nature, not with the idea that we are dominant over it, but that we are children of it. If we can make that shift and enjoy the shift and make it pretty, we got this sucker in the bag.
We sure do.
Did I get that in writing?
Yes, you can.
Cool.
That's beautifully said, Yay, Teish. And indeed, it is only by decolonizing the mind that we can truly understand the potential and capacity of operating the way that nature operates.
It'll be so healing. You know, it's one of those things where if you've ever cut yourself and you bled for a little while and then a scab formed and you thought you were okay, but then later on you had to pull it off and look at the inflammation underneath. We're pulling off the scab right now. It's time to clean up and patch up and heal. That's what time it is. That's what time it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just want to say one last thing about that, but there's a guy named John Warner, who's the top green chemist in the country, and he'll actually be at our Bioneers conference in April in California. But John talks about how basically what chemistry has done, which is antithetical to nature, is it tries to smash molecules together and make them do something. And what he does is he acts like he's the therapist and he puts the molecule on the couch and says, "What would you like to be when you grow up?" So anyway, that's a very different approach.
Wow.
Yes. Well, why don't we move on to speak about the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction? Becca and Rick, take it away.
This is really one that everybody tends to love. I certainly do. And because Jupiter's whole nature is to, lift up and kind of grant success to whatever it touches. If it's crossing your Venus in your chart, one's more likely to have expansion of love feelings and the more uplifting experience of beauty and so forth. Well, this is going to be about a year long, little more than a year, from the summer of 2023, so just coming up through the following summer of 2024. Jupiter will be conjoining Uranus. I mean, maybe you could just show briefly, Becca. It's pretty straightforward. The there. You can see the wave there. It will come most close to exact later in next spring, but it's already very much coming into orb this summer. And I should mention that both with the last slide that we were looking at here, where it showed all those peaks and troughs of Uranus and Pluto, and then this one with, see that? In both cases, what we notice historically, you could go back to that Uranus-Pluto for a second, but what you notice, what we find historically is that the events and concrete expressions that come out in our tracking of history really show that once the planets come within range, in all the way till the last point that it's within range, it's a continuous transit. Even though it's true that as it comes, those higher peaks there do represent intensifications of the energy, but with world transits, it's you've pushed that energy into motion with any of those peaks, and that doesn't just stop again like a light switch going off. Movements have been started. Things continue. There's a momentum that is established, and so it's more of a continuous overall arc or wave. Let's go over to the Jupiter-Uranus again, and so really it's even though you can see probably there will be some degree of intensification in next spring, but it really is from what we've noticed historically. And there's like 70 pages of evidence in Cosmos and Psyche just tracking all the ways in which the Jupiter-Uranus energy, where Jupiter tends to expand and elevate and give success to the Uranian Promethean principle of creativity and the new breakthroughs. Yeah, Becca, you could, I think people have it in their mind now, and maybe what to bring out a little bit more of some of the major specific features, potentials of this Jupiter conjunction. There's an impulse for greater freedom and change, but that impulse is often granted more success. If you've been gestating a project, a new something creative, so if you have in mind something that you've wanted to do for a long time, like to do a particular new enterprise or a new beginning of some sort in your life, or a composition of a work of art. This is such a catalyst for breakthroughs and for creative inspiration. Often there can be experiences that are kind of like peak experiences. There can be kind of quantum leaps that happen in your work in certain respects. Sudden expansion of consciousness. It's a good transit for for where you do things like initiatory rituals, or could be psychedelic therapy. It could be a wilderness vision quest. It could be psychotherapeutic work of there's more likelihood for breakthroughs to take place. Also, sudden new meetings in your life that open up new horizons. There can be kind of unexpected happy events are quite frequent. Also, there can be a greater sense of wonder, joyful wonder at life. It's a buoyant energy, and so along with the successful new beginnings, one can feel a greater impulse towards adventure, towards traveling, towards expanding one's world in various ways. There can be, and it could be literal travel to other parts of the world, but it also can be, and it can be travel in your consciousness. It can be expanding your mind and soul through great literature, great films, theater, etc. There's also, it's a playful energy, more playfulness, feeling brighter, lighter. It's a buoyant and kind of the happy, the sudden unexpected burst of like a new horizon opening up that you weren't expecting. One of the astrological, one of the people who, Reinhold Ebertin, who was a German astrologer and had some concise things to say about each of these planetary combinations, he called this the thank the Lord transit, because or like the thank God transit, because there is that quality of like, oh wow, a sudden unexpected release, a kind of a birth out of the challenging, constricting birth canal, that kind of sudden transition that unexpectedly opens up a new
It sounds
horizon.
like a catharsis, Rick.
Yeah, there is something, yeah, it can be a catharsis, especially with that Uranus trine Pluto, which allows the deeper energies to be accessed. But just the Jupiter-Uranus by itself, if you've been putting off a project or an enterprise, writing a book, whatever it happens to be, making a movie, this is a good time to start, because the gods tend to seem to support that that innovation. And as I say, there's many pages in Cosmos and Psyche that show sudden successful breakthroughs, beginning of the personal invention of the personal computer, or of the light bulb, or many great works of art were initiated under it. So you can look at the evidence there.
This is great news for so many of us who have books to finish, or operas to write, or gardens to plant. Perhaps we'll see a second season of Changing of the Gods, Kenny, who knows? With so much creative force available to us, there's nothing we can't do. So I'd like to move on now to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and we just have a few moments to talk about that before moving on to the US birth chart.
Well, I mean, I think just very simply put, with the Jupiter-Uranus, when Teish was speaking, that sense of hope, this awakening to joy and optimism and abundance and creativity that she was speaking to is so resonant of the Jupiter-Uranus alignment. And when you start paying attention to transits, you can feel them coming. You can kind of intimate their arrival. And so Teish just captured that so beautifully. With the Saturn-Neptune, we are going in a very different direction. And we've been talking about Saturn in terms of seriousness, consequences, the reality principle. And Neptune, which is an archetype that we haven't been talking about this evening so far, Neptune relates to the transcendent, to the sacred, to the spiritual, to the numinous. Neptune is the imagination. It's the world of images. It's symbolized by water. So it's very merging and flowing and dissolving of whatever it touches. And so you can see Saturn and Neptune are kind of complete opposites in that way. And it's this bridging between, as Rick describes it, between the real, that Saturn principle, and the ideal, the Neptunian principle. And so that gap between our ideal visions and dreams for the world and then the reality we live in, sometimes that gap can feel insurmountable. And so just to give a sense when this is happening, this is the graph for Saturn-Neptune. It's going to start coming in the spring of 2024, so next year. So this is really the middle decade alignment, and it will be it'll be peaking in 25, 26, and then kind of petering out in the middle of 2027. And so, historically, when we've seen Saturn-Neptune alignments, it can bring up more of these feelings of longing for an ideal world, and yet seeing the faults, the pain, the suffering, the losses under the Saturn-Neptune opposition, for example, that happened in the middle of the first decade of this millennium. We had Hurricane Katrina. We had the huge tsunami in Indonesia. Neptune is symbolized by water, and one of the when it's aligned with Saturn, one of the effects can be pain, suffering, loss, death. And so, speaking to the very kind of serious side of this, Saturn-Neptune can bring up grief. It can bring up mourning. It can bring up anxiety, a kind of non-specific anxiety, even melancholy, depression. There are often major challenges that arise under Saturn-Neptune alignments around opioid epidemics, for example, that kind of escapist tendency. Why? Because we're longing for the Neptunian, we're longing for the escape to go beyond the Saturnian realm of this world. And so in terms of our participation in that, how we can prepare ourselves, and I think it'll be helpful to have the buoyancy of the Jupiter-Uranus when we go into this to kind of carry us forward, that when things like melancholy and sadness and grief emerge, that practice of being with those feelings. And I wanted to share a quote from the extraordinary eco-philosopher and activist Joanna Macy, who was born with Saturn-Neptune. She said, "We are capable of suffering with our world, and that is the true meaning of compassion. It enables us to recognize our profound interconnectedness with all beings. Don't ever apologize for crying for the trees burning in the Amazon or over the waters polluted from the mines in the Rockies. Don't apologize for the sorrow, grief, and rage you feel. It is a measure of your humanity and your maturity. It is a measure of your open heart. And as your heart breaks open, there will be room for the world to heal. That is what is happening as we see people honestly confronting the sorrows of our time." So that's from Joanna Macy, who's born with a Saturn-Neptune trine. And so she can very beautifully speak to how to live with the Saturn-Neptune archetypal complex. And I think a way that we can really align with it is through, say, disciplined spiritual practice. Neptune is the spiritual practice, but Saturn brings in the discipline or pragmatic mysticism, a kind of recognition of the immanent divine, the Neptunian divine that is in this Saturnian world and realm. And so that can inspire us to be of service, tending the homeless, tending to the mentally ill or those who are in spiritual crisis or emergency. So that's some of what I would say about Saturn-Neptune, which again, it'll start next year in the spring of 2024, and it'll be with us into the early parts of 2027.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that Joanna Macy quote, Becca. That really touched us, as I can see from the chat. People really appreciated that. Now, let us move on to the US birth chart. Just to say that after thousands and thousands of years of indigenous peoples inhabiting and stewarding the land that continues to this day, of course, the country that we now call the United States was founded in 1776, July 4th. And I'll let you speak about the configurations that were at play then and what's happening now in that regard.
Yes. There's the birth chart of the U.S. on the 4th of July, 1776. And what's remarkable about this particular decade is that you can see where Pluto is down in that left-hand corner, and then show where Uranus is over there at the horizon, just setting at that time. Now, those two planets had been basically in a grand trine with Neptune in those years. This was a period of like both the height of the Enlightenment, which inspired the higher ideals of Jefferson and Madison and so forth, but also but what I want to emphasize here is that Uranus, it moves faster than the other three planets. So by this point, it had gotten up all the way to 8 Gemini. It will come back a little bit later in 1776 into 77. So it's still kind of participating in that grand trine. But the main thing that I want to point out is that we're in a point in the history of this government that, to distinguish that from the history of the continent, we're at a point in the history of this government that was kind of initiated in 1776, where Uranus and Pluto are both returning to where they were when it was at the beginning. And Becca, do you want to just show the, so here we've taken out, what we're looking at here is just the outer planets, just to make it simple. And look at how Pluto is right now, right conjoined. This is the first time since it takes nearly 250 years for Pluto to go around the whole chart. So this is what's called the Pluto return. No individual human being goes through a Pluto return. We go through perhaps a Pluto opposite Pluto if we live long enough, but not a Pluto conjunct Pluto again, where it's done the entire 360-degree circle of the zodiac and come back to its natal position. Many of us know about the Saturn return, have heard about it, that we all go through in our late 20s, going up to age 30, or again in the late 50s, and how important a threshold of transformation those periods are in our lives. Well, this is the Pluto return, so it's got that Plutonic quality. In a way, I mean, so these are long lasting. The Pluto return we're looking at throughout, it's been coming on for several years, and it's going to be going on for the rest of the decade, but it's really cooking right now. And at the same time, Becca, you want to just show when Uranus gets right back to its natal position? There you can see in just 4 years, it's going to be exactly on its natal position. And this is an 84-year cycle. So this is the third time that it's come around. And so basically the Uranus return, because these are several year transits, these are overlapping. We're basically going through the Pluto return and the Uranus return at the same time. So we can come back to me speaking now. And what I want to convey is the fact that the Pluto return, because Pluto relates to death and rebirth, destruction and renewal. This is what our whole nation is going through. And I mean, clearly what we are going through is unprecedented in our nation's history. The degree of both the challenge to democracy and the clashing wills to power, and at the same time, there's this potential for a new birth, and particularly with the Uranus return coming in at overlapping with it and moving in towards the later part of the decade, becoming exact. The first Uranus return for the United States took place in the 1860s when Lincoln freed the African Americans, the enslaved peoples, and declared that our nation was going to have a new birth of freedom. And see, that's the new birth of freedom. That's very Uranian language. And for that Uranus return, we're again going through that now as well. And because I'm focusing on this because the United States is basically a kind of elephant in the room on the surface of the planet. It decisions that it makes, upheavals that it goes through, they ripple out, they affect the rest of the world. Whether it's the ecology of the global biosphere, or whether it's other political movements and governments and decisions that they make, et cetera, it ripples out. And so for this nation to be going through that deep of a transformational death and rebirth, and none of us really know exactly what form this is going to take. We certainly feel the clashing energies that are at work, and both wanting a moral center to hold in the country through this great transition, and at the same time recognizing how profound a redemption this country needs. I mean, and Pluto returns tend to bring up the shadow to be looked at, the wounds that have been suppressed from the public consciousness, and to really face. I think we all recognize that the shadow of U.S. history is more apparent to more people now than it ever has been, and that's a good thing, because just as the same thing in our own individual lives, before we can move forward, we have to do deep inner work, and we have to face the shadow of our own behavior in the past, of the less integrated and less noble parts of ourselves, that we have to engage those and bring them to consciousness before they can be released. And that's what this is about. I think the country has the potential, with transits like this, to undergo as radical a transformation. Perhaps it'll be constitutional. That would be a blessing. But a lot's at stake, and it's an enormous transformation and potential new birth that this country is going through over this next decade. And even though it's one country, it happens to be one that affects all of us, whether we're living in France or Ukraine, or in Africa or Brazil.
So true, Rick. Thank you so much. And, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of that Carl Jung quote. He says, "We will become our opposite if we do not learn to accommodate the opposition within us." And I wonder if Kenny or Teish, if you have any words to offer on either that or what Rick was just speaking about the polarization that's happening now.
Yeah, I just wanted to insert one quick thing, which is that I know we're at time now for our 90 minutes before we transition to Q&A. What I would like to suggest, we wanted to do this first Cosmic Weather Report webinar and see how it goes, and see if you all like it out there. But we think it would be worthwhile to do an entire webinar on the US chart and the Pluto and Uranus returns. So let us know if you think that's a good idea. And I would love to hear what Teish has to say as kind of a wrap up to this segment.
Well, we recognize that every Orisha, every energy has both a light and a shadow side, right? And in many indigenous traditions, we placate the shadow side. We ask for, we recognize it, right? We recognize it in ourselves, and we ask to be cleansed. In Yoruba tradition, we actually have a ritual where we feed your shadow because it's hungry, and it's running around eating people up. So we feed it to tame it. We actually have a ritual wherein we do that. If somebody's behaving in a way that they consciously don't intend to, we say the shadow is eating it up. It's eating that person up. We really need to do a feeding, a cleansing and a feeding of the shadow of these major powers. I have to say this. From my point of view, Donald Trump is leading the parade of dictators, okay? I have watched around the world people mimicking the dishonesty, mimicking the division, just the senseless behavior. And we have to admit that this is political adolescence at work. We need to grow up. We need to grow up. It's not all right to do wrong just to be popular or just to be connected to somebody who's in power, We really need to grow up, because if we don't, mama gonna lay us down, you see? And that's what I keep trying to get people to understand, is that we're adolescents, we are in an adolescent state, and we need to grow up.
May the farce be with you.
Well, we are almost at time. We will be moving into our Q&A, but before we do, to sum up a lot of what we've touched on this evening, we're going to roll a clip from episode 10, the final episode of the Changing of the Gods docuseries.
Stan Groff has called the archetypal astrology the Rosetta Stone of the human psyche. It provides this extraordinary insight into what are the deeper forces at work at any given time in a person's life. It's fantastic to have a kind of cosmic weather report. Let's say you're going out sailing or surfing. It's very nice to know which way the winds are blowing, how powerful they are. All that's very helpful to know. Towards the end of this Uranus-Pluto square, in 2018 through 2020-21, Saturn is going to move into a conjunction with Pluto and then squaring Uranus. It does bring those three archetypal principles into intense interaction. What one would expect typically is a confrontation with the reality principle. There's a contraction. There's a coming down to earth. There's a coming home to roost of the chickens. It tends to be a serious time. It tends to be a time that concentrates people's minds because of the gravity of what's happening. We'll need to confront, as never before, how industrial civilization has been treating the rest of the Earth community. We as a planet are confronting mortality. Near-death experiences have tremendous power to reconfigure moral values. You see life differently, you see yourself differently, you have new values come up. As Saturn interacts with Uranus, the 2021-22 period is a critical turning point when the past meets the future with great force. We need to institute rapid but skillful fundamental changes under these transits, or else sudden breakdowns can happen as dysfunctional structures suddenly collapse altogether. We have to carry what's most valuable from the past and discern what's most promising from the future, and then bring these into practical form in all our life structures. This period could bring deep structural changes such as a Green New Deal, truly globalizing the New Deal of the 30s, or the spread of rights of nature governance structures. This can set the stage for the rest of the 2020s, when we'll have the benefit of Uranus moving into the more harmonious 120-degree trine alignment to Pluto. This particular aspect tends to indicate potentially greater flow and harmony so that the same archetypal forces that have been unleashed through the clash of the Uranus-Pluto square may then work together in more confluent ways.
As we enter the 2020s, Richard Tarnas says that the powerful archetypal energies of the Uranus-Pluto square won't turn off like a light switch. They will continue to flow with a full head of turbulent steam that's already saturating the collective psyche. As Saturn has entered the epochal climax of this long Uranus-Pluto period, this alignment represents a civilizational stress test. What can feel like a permanent 5-alarm emergency is a distress signal that massive change is inescapable. It's exactly such times that can bring forth the moral courage and deep insight with which we can confront great dangers and powerful forces to transform a world in crisis.
The world hangs on a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man.
A fundamental changing of the gods seems to be at work right now. Our whole understanding of the human being, of men's and women's relationship to each other, of the different cultures and races and peoples, of the earth, of evolution, of the cosmos, of our relationship to the larger community of life. Our future deeply depends on what level of consciousness and engagement we bring to this historical moment to bring forth the best possible results.
What a beautiful clip. And for those of you still with us, and I hope you are because we're about to move into Q&A, I'd like to tell you where you can watch the series. You can rent or purchase it at changingofthegods.com. It's on many of the major platforms. You can find it on Amazon, Vimeo, iTunes. But just know that if you go to changingofthegods.com, not only will you get a lot more information about the series, you can easily rent or purchase the series. And I really encourage you to do that. It is just so well done. So moving on to Q&A, thank you to all of you who've put questions into the Q&A box. We have one from Wade, and Wade says, Richard and Becca, you were talking about the importance of knowing our personal transits so that we can help bring out the noble aspects of the planetary archetypes at play as opposed to being at the whim of the shadow aspects. Could you give us an example or two of how to work with our personal transits in this way? Great question.
Becca, why don't you take a run at it? You have lots of experience.
Well, in terms of working with your personal transits, it is helpful first to know the world transit context because you know the larger framework that you're working within. But then how those larger transits align with our personal birth chart will show what area of our life that's going to show up in. Let's say this Jupiter-Uranus alignment, it happens to be lining up on your Venus, then that might bring a great deal of inspiration in the artistic field or in terms of creation of music or painting, or you might not even be an artist and suddenly that's awakened in you. Or Venus, which also relates to love and romance and the heart, might awaken that kind of blossoming in a new relationship or the reinvigoration of a relationship that you're already in. Conversely, if you have a world transit crossing your sun, you might feel very personally identified with that. And whereas if it's aligning, say, on your Mars, you might feel more fired up to take action and feel more anger in response. Like, why is all this rage coming through me in response when that might not be what is happening for others in the closest proximity to you. So that's really, those particular personal planetary alignments are going to show where in our lives this comes through, more how we're going to respond to it, and what our personal participation is in that. And ways to do that, to get to know that more, unless you're already a practicing astrologer, is get a reading or several readings from good astrologers who can guide you in that way. And having several readings is helpful because you get a multiplicity of perspectives, and you don't just kind of take as doctrine one astrologer's viewpoint, but you actually get a variety of perspectives on the same astrological phenomena. So yeah, definitely recommend getting a reading.
Yes, Rick.
I'll just add to that. I think particularly, I sense that Wade is asking for also a sense for, like, if what would be an example of what we can do to bring out the more noble side of an alignment too, instead of acting out its shadow form. And let's take that Saturn opposite Neptune, or Saturn conjunct Neptune, that's coming up in the middle years of this decade. And, you know, one, if some of those feelings that Becca brought up that might involve a sense of the distance between one's aspirations and ideals and what the reality is, and the sense of you know, perhaps melancholy or sadness, or a sense even of yeah, just that there's a loss about that grasp, about that gap. If you have those feelings coming up and you kind of are aware that, oh, well, this is kind of what that's one side of what this archetypal energy is about, and that allows us to kind of bless the emotion, welcome it when it comes in, so that it can be released. Because if we just suppress it, it's just going to linger until we finally let it in the door. But the other side of it is, by knowing some of the other ways in which that same archetypal complex can be enacted, we can, for example, Becca mentioned the importance and the value of a serious spiritual practice. It's a very good transit for prayer, for meditation, for focusing one's consciousness in a particular way. And also it's something to keep in mind. This is the last thing I'll say about this. It's only in the seed, in order to grow, has to be in the darkness underground. And that's the way faith and hope work too. They are, faith grows in the darkness. It doesn't grow in the bright sun. There's no need for it. You're already there. Oh, everything's great. You know, Beethoven's Ode to Joy is happening and the birds are singing. But it's during those times when is encountering some like the dark night of the soul, or just, you know, everyday kind of disillusionment, to know that that's a time when the kind of Saturnian fortifying of one's faith in a higher ideal, one's hope for a greater future, can be, that's when the muscle is built. Because it's built when there are stresses, when you're moving against, you know, a muscle needs to work against, you know, resistance. That's how muscles are amplified. Okay, so just thought I'd add that as one example among many of ways to bring out the higher form of a particular archetypal energy.
Wonderful. On that same note, Teish, we have a question for you, which is, how can I strengthen my relationship to the unseen world and the archetypes?
Mm-hmm. So, honestly, people, the first thing you have to do is shut down your monkey mind, okay? The mind that's always jibber-jabbering at you, you know, the critical one, the blah, blah, blah. No. honestly, the simplest thing you can do is sit down with a clear glass of water and a candle, shut down your monkey mind, right? Stop jibber jabbering, and ask your spirit to speak to you. You know, I'm oversimplifying right now because I teach this in a 9-week course, but that's the beginning. To get still and quiet. Like I said earlier, Yemayah, the mother of the ocean, tells us to, before we take any action, we need to sit and meditate. We need to sit and meditate. We need to sit and let spirit speak to us. Okay, that's the very, very beginning. The other, and I can't say right now because it's cold, but to walk barefoot on the earth, right? And recognize your kinship to the grass and the trees and the wind and the birds, and see yourself not above it, but a part of it. To learn how to listen to what the crickets are saying to you, you know. I think that this false sense of superiority that we have as human beings really, really gets in the way. It assumes that we know everything, that we are everything, that we can control everything. And most often, especially for those of us who are educated, it teaches us to silence the voice of spirit. That is never going to help you to grow. It's never going to help you to grow. It's not complex. It's just a matter of being willing to open that third eye, what we call Iwaju, the eye of character, and allow the light to shine on the path in front of you. And somebody asked that course is called Cracking the Ancestral Code. And I only teach it in fall because that's the season when the ancestors are walking free.
Teish, do you want to mention also, I think your new book is about to come out, and don't you have an online event on Saturday?
Oh, yes. It's called A Calabash of Cowries. And in African tradition, the whole universe is a calabash, and it's full of cowries. That is the thing that we use to make our way in this world. This book, my editor says it took me 4 years to do it. It is full of my favorite stories from the sacred orature, and I highlight the characters who are ordinarily left out. I connect it to the natural world. I provide rituals to help you to embody the meaning of the story, and also recommend actions that you can take. So on Saturday, one of the stories I'm gonna read is The Mermaid's Lover. And if you like The Mermaid's Lover, I want you to go down to the ocean and clean up the trash there, and feed the ocean, and look at your dreams, and allow yourself some of that Neptunian stuff we've been talking about.
Ah, perfect. Yay, Teish. All right, we have one last question from Jennifer. And Jennifer asks, what about Pluto and Jupiter transit?
I mean, basically, the Jupiter-Pluto energy is something that really helps in leadership and in coming into one's depths for being able to lift up and regenerate in a way. Let's see. So, are you able to? Yeah. So you're able to go forward. So you can. Yeah. Everybody can see where Jupiter is right now. We're in a Venus-Jupiter conjunction.
Go see it if you have clear skies, which probably none of us do.
Yes, it was visible here last night with the moon not too far away. In fact, you can see at this moment, if it is a clear sky in California, you would be able to see Venus and Jupiter and the moon, and then Mars far overhead. Those people who are further east and in Europe, et cetera, this is already set. But let's go forward. We can see where Jupiter is right now, and the next transit that it will make to Pluto will be the square. When it gets to the end of Aries, you could just go forward by the month, and people can just see how this works. So as soon as it gets up, yeah, just go forward one. There we go. So
yep, there we go.
There you can see there's the square, Jupiter at 1 Taurus, Pluto's at 0 Aquarius. So there's a Jupiter-Pluto energy at work. One does have to watch out for, with Jupiter-Pluto, a tendency to either take the moral high ground of thinking of one's superior to everybody else, kind of the way Teish was talking about the shadow of modern Homo sapiens, particularly modern man, if I might put the traditional patriarchal gender on it, that false sense of superiority over the rest of nature that came in with much modernity. That's a danger with the Jupiter-Pluto energy, as a sense of superiority, or taking on larger projects, almost like with a greed for greater and greater expansion or wealth or whatever. But as I say, this is a very positive energy, even in a square or opposition, for the forwarding of the deep dive, the descent, and then the emergence to the height. See, the descent is Pluto, the Jupiter is the elevation, and the successful emergence out of the dive into the underworld. And so you see it very often for powerful psychological transformations that people go through, as well as moral transformations that a nation can go through. But yeah, so we're touching on it. I mean, and Jupiter will trine Pluto in another year after that. It just lasts a shorter time than a lot of these other transits that we've been talking about. But since you brought it up, that's a couple words about it.
That's great.
Oh, thank you, Rick. You know, with everything that we've covered this evening, I'm left feeling like we can do this. I feel hopeful about the next 10 years, and I hope that everybody who's been watching on Zoom or on YouTube this evening feels the same way. In closing, I'd like to thank our participants, all of you viewers. I'd also like to thank our panelists, Becca Tarnas, Rick Tarnas, Luisah Teish, Kenny Ausubel, of course, and a shout out to our partners, Astro Gold, Unlock Astrology, Jennifer Freed Astrology, Astrology University, Stephen Forrest, the Astrology Podcast, Rachel Lang Astrology, the Myth Salon, the Organization for Professional Astrology, and Astrology Hub. We're so grateful for your partnership, and I would love to turn it over now to series creator Kenny Ausubel. Kenny, I know that people would like to hear more about Bioneers, where many thought leaders, such as those that are featured in the film, convene each year, and also anything else you would like to share with our viewers.
Thank you so much, Téana. Well, I learned so much tonight, and it's such an honor and a delight to be with my three friends here who are so wise and so knowledgeable. And we all know each other a little bit after spending years together on the film. So I just love the flow and the kind of synchronicity that happens in these kinds of conversations. One thing I would say is I'll make a deal with you all. Let us know what you thought of this. This was an experiment. If we should do more, tell us. And if we're going to do more, I'll make a deal with you, which is please help promote awareness of the film. It's available, as Téana said, on our website, but also on Amazon, YouTube, iTunes. It's cheap. It's $15, I think, to rent it and $20 to buy it. Please tell everybody and their mother. As independent filmmakers, it's so hard to get the word out about these things. So we really need your help. And I'm a big believer in the value of these kind of public conversations. And these are things that sometimes happen at the kitchen table, but to be able to have this conversation in public in this way, I believe has a real impact and influence in the world, and it gets us all thinking and talking to our friends and moving it into the world, doing things because of what we've learned here. So, and Téana mentioned Bioneers, we have our annual conference, which is an extraordinary event happening April 6th through the 8th in Berkeley, California. It's a large event. Many of the people in the film that you've seen will be there. Many others, other people can probably speak better to Bioneers than I can, but it's practical and visionary solutions for restoring people and planet. And it's really focused on, the revolution from the heart of nature and the human heart. So bioneers.org is our website. And we would love, if you do come to the conference, please come and say hello. We'll be there. And I'm very grateful, Téana, for your lovely job moderating. And, it was the entrepreneur's mantra, get your ducks in a row before you let the cat out of the bag, right? So we let the cat out of the bag and we're still here. That's good.
Thank you, Kenny. I'd also like to thank our Zoom tech, Jeffrey Kin, as well as Theo Badashi and Maximilian Diarman, who have been tremendously supportive in allowing this webinar to happen.
Theo is the lead editor for the film, and Max is the other producer, without whom this film would not exist. So huge props. And there are other people on the film, but Max and Theo are right there at the top. So
huge props. Thank you, everybody. Peace and blessings. Be well until next time, and spread the word.
Indeed. Lots of love.